not necessarily the most pleasant thoughts to think about. They relate to something that is on the minds of many people in our nation and in our society right now. Bill even alluded to it in his prayer this morning. So I want to share with you some thoughts that relate to something that is on the mind of many of us. But I want to start out by relating and reminding us of certain facts that pertain to a most tragic loss of life. A man was taken into custody by agents acting on behalf of the government. To the best of my knowledge, the criminal activity of which he was accused that caused him to be arrested was never established. I'm saying that I have not heard any reliable source declare that he was actually guilty of the thing that he had been taken into custody for. Actually, by all accounts that I've heard, this person was a pretty good guy. Certainly, like anyone else, he had enemies. But by all accounts, from those who knew him best, he was a good man. But he was arrested. And all indications are that he did not resist arrest or in any way try to make it difficult for those arresting him to do so. He was arrested and he was abused. And as I think about the scene surrounding his death, and as I visualize it in my mind, it is something that is terribly unpleasant to think about. Ultimately, he was restrained in such a way in which it was a way in which that was known to cause asphyxiation. And he died. He died as a result. By all accounts, it was a terrible way to die. And every indication is that it should not have happened. He was treated unfairly. He was killed unjustly. Oh, as many of you may be aware by now, there were three notable words that this man spoke in the final moments before he died. Three words that have come to be associated with this man and his death. Those three words, you know them. It is finished. By now, most of us are aware of the tragic case of George Floyd up in Minnesota. And I want to acknowledge up front, I don't know all the details of the case. I wasn't there. I do want to make that point up front. But it does have every appearance that this case was a massive tragedy. And perhaps even a case of injustice taking place. You know, even if it turns out, like I said, I don't know that I've heard anything confirming that he did what they arrested him for. But even if it turns out that he was guilty of that for which he was arrested, I think most everyone, especially most everyone in this nation, knows that the way he died is not the way justice and punishment is to be distributed. It's written in this nation's Constitution. The Fifth Amendment, part of the Bill of Rights. No person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. I think that's a good thing. Even if I knew for a fact that someone did commit a crime, I would want that right respected and observed because I would want it observed if somebody accused me of something. So I'm certainly bothered, like many people, by what appears to be an injustice. And I'm certain, in light of things that I've already mentioned this morning and things that we know that are going on, we're going to be hearing a lot about this very sad incident for a long time to come. That could turn out to be a good thing. I mean, you never know what good could come from something like this and maybe bring about some improvements that we need in our society. But as tragic and as unjust as we may feel the death of George Floyd was, honestly, how can anything, any wrong or injustice ever committed, even begin to compare with the great injustice that was committed at Calvary? When the only truly innocent man who ever lived, not just not guilty, as we say in our courts of law, but actually innocent, the only truly innocent man who ever lived was intentionally put to death in an agonizing way by his enemies. And I'm aware that Jesus' death was a necessary part of God's plan for saving mankind. But, that does not absolve those who delivered him up from their guilt. On the night of his arrest, Jesus in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 24 stated, "The Son of Man goes just as it is written of him. But woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for him if he had not been born." Well, I can acknowledge certainly that good things have come from Jesus' death. Our ability to live with God in heaven as a result, good things have certainly come from Jesus' death. But from this passage in Matthew, as well as others that we could cite, it seems clear that the Lord will not fail to hold responsible those whose unjust actions intentionally resulted in the death of the innocent Son of God. That was an injustice. It wasn't the first and it wasn't the last one, as we know. The existence of wrong and injustice in this world and in this life is simply a fact of life for every one of us. Now, where George Floyd is concerned, I do not believe that it was anyone's intent that he died. But it does seem that mistakes were made, and perhaps precautions were neglected that contributed to the very sad conclusion to that episode. And I assume and I hope that all the relevant facts will come out as the officers involved will receive their due process of law. And I hope and I assume that justice will be served in the case, whatever form is appropriate, whatever form of justice is appropriate under the laws of this land and given the circumstances. I'm not a lawyer and I don't know all the details, so I can't really say what that would be. But my purpose this morning really is not so much to talk about legal issues, or even the news of the day, or even to try to deal with the racial issues that beset our society. Quite frankly, I think that can really be taken care of if we just listen to the words of the man from Nazareth. "Whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, do ye even so unto them." What I want to address this morning is this concept of injustice and the desire that we all have to see justice done. How we are to deal with the realities of life in this regard as children of God. What we're seeing in major cities right now, for those of us that have a few years under our belts, it's not the first time we've seen something like this. I can remember back in the early 1990s, out in California, some other police officers were tried for something similar. The man didn't die, but they were acquitted, and just terrible rioting took place then. Very similar to what we're seeing right now. And right now we haven't even got as far along in the process. Those riots occurred after the trial. The officers involved here haven't even been tried yet. They will be. And there's a good chance that they will be convicted of something. I don't know what, again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything for certain yet, though. But people are not waiting. They're not waiting to see what will happen in that regard. What has already taken place is enough of an injustice in the minds of many to justify what's being done right now. Well, I wonder what George Floyd himself would think about all of this. I wonder what George Floyd would want people to do in the aftermath of his death. We will never know, will we? His voice was silenced a few days ago. But the other man that I've referred to this morning, the other victim of an unjust killing, who suffered an unjust death at the hands of unjust men, his voice was not silenced the day he died. He returned from the dead. He confirmed his identity and his authority as the Son of God in so doing, and he continues to speak to men to this very day by the written word, in which men documented his teachings, guided by the Holy Spirit, so as to reveal to men and women of every succeeding generation up to and including our own, how we ought to conduct ourselves in the flesh, at all times and under any circumstances. When we perceive injustice in this world, we should thus take note of what he teaches in this regard through his word. And certainly, he teaches that we should desire justice in this life and in this world. Certainly for our parts, he teaches us to be just people. God desires justice, and he wants us to desire it. He wants us to be a just people. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 17, in Romans 12 and 17, Paul writes there, repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. Now we're going to talk about Paul's first statement in this verse a little later. I want to focus in on the last part of this verse right now. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. The word that is translated good there in that verse literally has reference to that which is honest or that which is fair. Very similar in concept to the idea of just. There is a need for us, each one of us, to be just people, to be just and fair. But again, not only does the Lord tell us that we should expect to be just people ourselves, that we should be just people, it seems evident from his New Testament that we have a right to expect justice from others, especially those who have been placed in positions of great power and authority. I was once involved in a discussion with a brother, and it had something to do with government. And he made the assertion, I won't get it exactly right, it's been a few years, but basically he strongly implied that God doesn't give direction to governing authorities as to how they ought to govern. I disagree with that. Now, I don't think he provides detailed instructions as to what tax policy should be followed or what we should do about education. No, he doesn't do that. But I do not believe that God is indifferent to how those in positions of authority exercise the responsibilities of their position. I believe this has always been the case in every era of man's history, that God has expectations for those who are given this authority. Still in the book of Romans, actually it's in the same opening in my Bible, in Romans chapter 13, verses 3 and 4, Paul writes there, rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Now, we understand that what Paul is writing here is God's expectation for governing authorities. He expects them to be a terror to those who do evil. He expects them to punish the wrongdoer. He expects them to be no threat, however, to the one that does good. So he expects them to rule and govern justly. But we all know that those expectations that God has are not always met by everyone who is in such a position. Corruption and wicked rulers have been a fact of life throughout mankind's history. Even, unfortunately, among the people of God. I think of Hophni and Phinehas back in 1 Samuel, in the days of Samuel. Hophni and Phinehas, they were priests, men with great authority in Israel. In fact, you think about it, prior to the establishment of the kingship in Israel, the high priest and his subordinate priests really were the highest authorities in Israel. And here's Hophni and Phinehas, sons of Eli, the high priest, priests themselves. But you read 1 Samuel chapter 2, and you see that these were very corrupt men. Exceedingly wicked. So much so that verse 17 of that text tells us that their conduct as God's priest caused them to abhor the offering of God. People didn't want to go worship God because they didn't want to have to deal with these men. How serious of an offense against the Lord is that? And the high priest, their father, did little to try to correct them, apart from maybe shaking his finger and saying, guys, you really shouldn't be doing that. No, they were allowed to continue in their position despite their ongoing sins against the people. You can fast forward through history and things don't change a lot in Israel, even when the kingdom does come. I think of what the Lord had Isaiah write about the rulers of his day, which would include priests as well as civil authorities. In Isaiah chapter 10 and verse 1, there the prophet writes, woe to those who decree unrighteous decrees and write misfortune which they have prescribed, to rob the needy of justice, take what is right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey. That's just one small portion of the book of Isaiah. people over whom they have been given authority. God desired and expected them to do better than that. And he was aware that they were not. The people had a right to expect better from their rulers, a right to expect justice and righteousness, and they had a right to expect that justice would be exercised against the corrupt rulers. Now it was. That's one thing to remember. If you're familiar, for example, with the account of Hophni and Phinehas, as the saying goes, they got theirs. They fell in battle against the Philistines, and even their father, who did not exercise his office as he should have, when he received news of their death, he died as well. Those people in positions of power in Israel in Isaiah's day, the Assyrians came to them. They overran the kingdom and scattered that tribe throughout the world. Scattered those tribes throughout the world. God has always given all people, whether they are common folk like you and me or people of great standing, he's always given them time and opportunity to clean up their act when they weren't acting like they would, when they were acting like they shouldn't. But when those in such positions, and that's really what we're focusing on, when those in such positions would not voluntarily clean up their act, after they had had time to do so, God did take matters into his own hands, and he always will do that, I believe. There's a fact about God. And his relationship to earthly rulers, I think that remains true today, that all earthly rulers would do well to remember, and really all of us would do well to remember as well, as we deal with dissatisfaction on our part sometimes with our leaders. But I'm thinking about what the Lord told the great king Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4, verse 32. When Nebuchadnezzar was lifted up with such pride, there he was told the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. And right about then, he was away from Nebuchadnezzar, remember? Rulers. And those who act on behalf of rulers would do well to remember that the authority and the power that they've been given ultimately has come to them from above. Isn't that what Jesus told Pilate at his trial? And so we have a right to expect justice and righteousness from those in authority. We have a right to look for such. Those who possess such authorities we are speaking of would fall into that category that Jesus spoke of in Luke chapter 12 when he talked about to whom much has been given, much will be required. I believe they fall into that category. We know, as children of God, we believe that God will deal with injustice. I believe that with all my heart. But we grow impatient sometimes. When we grow impatient, we need to remember that God will set such things right. But we must also remember he will do this on his own timetable and not ours. He may not act as quickly as we might like him to act sometimes. I think of that vision John had in Revelation chapter 6. When he saw those souls that had been slain for the faith under the altar, crying out to the Lord for vengeance. And it's clear they wanted vengeance right now. How long are you going to make us wait, O Lord? You remember what they were told? Verse 11, Revelation chapter 6 and verse 11, they were told that they should wait and rest a little while longer. God was going to do something, but he was going to do it on his schedule. He always does. And for that matter, he may not do what we think ought to be done. Not only will he act on his own schedule, but he will do what he thinks best and not what we think best. The prophet Habakkuk. Now there was a righteous man who was vexed by the unrighteousness in his society. He saw injustice in Israel and in Judah, and he saw unrighteousness abounding, and he cried out to the Lord, when are you going to do something about it? Why don't you do something about it? And God told Habakkuk, I'm going to do something about it. And then he told Habakkuk what he was going to do about it. He was going to allow the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, to come in and overrun the kingdom and plunder the kingdom. And Habakkuk's initial response to that news was not one of joy and contentment that God was going to have his justice. No. That's not the way Habakkuk wanted God to solve this problem. But he eventually remembered at the end of his There are a lot of good folks, up to the highest levels of such authority. But we also know that there are many not good people in such positions as well. We want to see things set right where those people are concerned. We want the swamp to be drained, don't we? The men don't do it on their own. We want God to do it. To make things better. Well, let me tell you something. I believe He will. I believe He will in His time and in His way. Let's remember the words of Paul in Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, where he tells us that God will cause all things to work together for good for those who love Him. So, what do we do in the meantime, though? While we wait for justice to be seen, what do we do until God sets things right? Well, in the context of what we're talking about this morning, we live as good citizens in whatever land or nation we're in, submitting to the authority that those who are in positions of authority do currently hold. Back in Romans 13, this time we're back to read verses 1 and 2. Paul writes there, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves." The authorities that exist have been appointed by God. Wow. You need to remember, God has His own purposes. God has His own ways. And I've quoted this passage quite a bit, but do you remember what Isaiah said about God's ways? They are higher than ours. They are higher than our own. He serves His purposes by doing things His way. And He has done so even in those to whom He has appointed positions of authority. Now, knowing that God is working out His own purposes in His own ways, it should make perfect sense for the committed child of God to comply with Paul's command here to live in submission to those authorities that God has established. We do recognize there's an exception to that rule. I hope we all recognize that. It's the exception that Peter and the other apostles spoke of in Acts chapter 5, when the governing authorities told them not to do something that Jesus had told them to do. And remember, their response was, "We must obey God rather than men." If the decree of our governing authorities would have us act contrary to the will of God, in such an instance as that, we must not obey the governing authorities. But again, that's the exception to the rule. Sometimes we get, it's this way with a lot of things actually. We'll get sometimes talking about the exception to the rule that will overlook what the rule itself says. The rule is obey those in positions of authority. That's what God expects of us. He expects us to obey them, to submit to the laws of the land. Heck, He expects more than that of us even in this room. He expects us to support these people through our prayers. We are told to pray for these people in 1 Timothy chapter 2. In 1 Timothy chapter 2 and beginning in verse 1. Remember what Paul writes there. "Therefore I exhort first of all that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and all who are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and reverence. For this is good or acceptable in the sight of God our Savior." God expects us to pray for these people. Even the corrupt ones. Even if the government that they run is against us. Do you remember what government ruled the world at the time God had Paul write these words? A government that openly persecuted Christians, put them to death. Things may be pretty bad in some areas of our government. I dare say they're really not even worse than they were in the government that Paul was living under at the time that he wrote these words. There's something else that I think of along these lines. I think of the need to pray for those in positions of authority. There's a gentleman down in Alabama who I grew up around. Actually, my brother grew up with, and they did a lot of things together. I grew up with his younger brother. Our families used to vacation together over here in the mountains when I was growing up. Every year we'd come up with that family. The man I'm thinking of is now an active member and a deacon at the congregation where I grew up, the congregation where I was baptized. And he's a high-ranking government official. He's the chief of police in the city that I grew up in, a city about the size of Knoxville. I'm not telling you this to name drop. I haven't even dropped his name out. I'm telling you this to remind you that some of those government officials that we are told to pray for may indeed be brothers and sisters in Christ who are trying to do their part to bring righteousness into this society. Don't they merit our prayers? Pray for those who bear such responsibility and live in submission to their authority. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in us as citizens of our temporal kingdom as well as our eternal one. As Peter put it in 1 Peter chapter 2, let's keep our conduct honorable in this regard, so that our God will be glorified, even as we seek justice in this life. We live in submission to authority. Now that doesn't mean that we have to just accept things as they are if we perceive them to be unjust and not right. That doesn't mean we just accept them and not seek to make things better. No, the fact of the matter is, Christians have always had means at their disposal to make things better. First and foremost, they can share the gospel. In Acts chapter 13, we read of Paul and Barnabas converting a Roman proconsul, government official by the name of Sergius Paulus. I'll tell you what, you get the rulers as well as people in general to accept the authority of Jesus in their lives, things will get better. So we've always had that at our disposal to try to improve the things around us when we see that they need improvement. Paul noted in Romans chapter 1 that the gospel is God's power, and it is powerful enough to change the life of anyone who believes. Even a politician. Even a government official. So we have a duty to try to improve things that way. But beyond even that, and I guess this is more of an American-centric part of my sermon here, with regard to those of us who live in America, quite frankly, we are blessed to live in a nation and under a law that has mechanisms in place to make changes when it is felt that improvements need to be made. And this is where the old community college instructor comes out a little bit here. But the founders of this nation, they knew that they were not infallible. And they knew that they might forget something. They might leave something out that needed to be included. And so the system they created included provisions for changes to take place when necessary. The highest civil law in this land, the Constitution, includes instructions on how to change the highest civil law in this land. And it gives its citizens, including the Christians, the ability to bring about that change. We have no excuse, therefore, to act outside the law as we try to exercise such change when we see it as necessary. We that live in this room live in a nation where we possess rights, recognized by the government, the exercise of which we can use to make improvements that need to be made. Again, first and foremost, we have the right to share the gospel. But even beyond that, there are other things that we can do as citizens of this nation. Paul was a Roman citizen. And I think Paul's a good example of what I'm talking about here. Someone who was willing to use his rights as a citizen to advance the cause for which he was fighting. I think about some things we read about in the book of Acts, how in Acts chapter 16, he uses Roman citizenship to rebuke those that had held him in Philippi, to rebuke those that had treated him so poorly in Philippi. In Acts chapter 22, he used his rights as a Roman citizen to avoid being scourged. It wasn't lawful to scourge a Roman citizen. They were about to do it. You know what Paul said? What you're doing is not lawful. Of course, in Acts chapter 25, he used his rights as a Roman citizen to seek a hearing before the emperor himself because of the great injustice that was about to be exercised on him otherwise. Quite frankly, I think it would have been a mistake on Paul's part to fail to use those rights to his advantage as he sought to advance the cause of Christ. lawful way, in which he was not making himself an enemy of the empire, but acting within his rights as a citizen of the empire. He made full use of his rights as a citizen to advance the cause that he believed in a manner that would be recognized as lawful, or that should have been recognized as lawful. Maybe I should put it that way. But right now, there are many people in this land who feel that justice is not being served, and they are demonstrating to indicate their displeasure and call for improvements. And many of them are doing so in a lawful and peaceful manner, and I applaud them. I applaud them for their conduct. However, many are intentionally violating the law of the land and refusing to submit to the governing authorities as the Lord, through Paul, commanded. Now, some will say that they are justified in breaking the law, in looting, destroying, and even killing because of the wrongs that have already been committed. You do not have the right. No one has the right to return evil for evil. Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 17. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 15. See that no one renders evil for evil to anyone, but always pursue what is good, both for yourselves and for all. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another. Love as brothers. Be tenderhearted. Be courteous. Not returning evil for evil, or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, blessing, knowing that you were called to this, that you may inherit a blessing. There are a lot of people right now that have perceived that an evil has been done, and they have determined to return evil in exchange. This is wrong. This is sinful. This is contrary to the will of God. You know, there in 1 Peter, later on in 1 Peter chapter 4, Peter notes that it's honorable if you suffer for your faith. You're suffering for something that you've done that's not wrong. It's honorable to suffer because of your faith in Christ, but it is no honor to suffer because you've done something wrong, like murdering or stealing or doing some other evil. Quite frankly, justice says that you should suffer for doing things like that. So we don't do them. We need to look for justice, even in this world, though we may not ever see it. We need to look for it. We need to expect it. We need to desire it. And we need to trust God that He will, sooner or later, see to it that it is done. Until it is, live in submission to the governing authorities. God says He wants you to. And that means that even as we seek to improve society in ways that we think it needs to be improved, we do it in a proper manner. There's a right way and a wrong way. We do it in a way that is befitting someone who lives according to the teachings of Jesus the Christ. That may not be easy at times. It does take a good bit of patience. As we see all that is wrong in the world around us. Times that we grow impatient, that we need to remember that as children of God, we have got to view everything from the perspective eternity. Because only in eternity will we ever see things